This is just a short little video on a crazy little comic book that I found. It's from the early 90s. One thing that I do in a bookstore sometimes is, I love supporting bookstores, but your TBR list is always just so long. So sometimes if they have a comics section, I'll just buy a random single issue of a comic. And it's a lot cheaper than buying a book, and you can actually read it, like complete it, while you're sitting there in that bookstore. So it's a fun little experience, and I got this very zine-like bizarre publication called Mack the Knife. Now, Mack the Knife, of course, would make us think of the song. Bobby Darin pictured here, of course, having the definitive version, but yeah, it was a standard. Louis Armstrong did a version, I've just like kind of everybody back in that era, but it's a song about a criminal. And it's an old song from 1928 in the famous Threepenny Opera, but it's about this London underworld criminal, who of course is known for his use of the blade. Well, the comic book doesn't play off on that in any way. Instead, it's about an anthropomorphic shark who's kind of an old-school hipster bad guy, like a 1950s criminal scam artist type. And let's take a look at this craziness. First issue, entitled Big Bucks and Brass Knucks. Brass knucks being an old-school term for brass knuckles. So, I don't know how long this thing ran. It's from Caliber Comics, but it really just seems like kind of a crazy lark that these guys thought up. There's a look at Mac. There's kind of this dark, evil Bugs Bunny type character that appears in the first story. There's more than one story in this first issue. And it was fun to trip across this because it really reminds me of like more of an underground zine than an actual comic book. In the first story, there's a loan shark who I think is an actual shark, and his enforcer is an octopus. You can see that kind of cartoonish violence is funny too, because it's a little bit of a satire of like the Tom and Jerry, pre-political correctness era animation. And that's fun to see, and it's kind of that Bugs Bunny type thing where a character can just whip up a costume out of nowhere, or a giant, cartoonishly, pun intended, a large weapon or item. Like the pliers that you're going to see at the bottom right when I flip the page. That's part of the fun of this experiment, too, of just buying a single issue at random and reading it. It's kind of a snapshot in time. Well, I should specify if you buy an old issue, and that's part of the fun of doing this. And this thing was like 22 years old and cost about $1. I mean, these are issues that nobody's really clamoring for. The second story had more of a mad scientist, a science fiction vibe. And the whole thing is just really wacky. Really reminds me of, like I said, underground magazines and the comic strips that would be in that kind of a thing back in an earlier era. Over here has this funny making of little featurette. So the creative team here was Bill Widener and Starlin Baxter. Well, let's jump around some more. Notice how visually dense all these panels here are. I love this. And here is God inflicting revenge on Mac because he went on such a bender. And as you can see up here, that bender included snorting speed. So yeah, not for kids. Mack the Knife. I don't know, I might pick up a couple of more back issues at some point. And that was my random bookstore find. Thanks.